Okay, now social phobia or social anxiety disorder. Anybody see any commercials for this? They used to have commercials. I don't know. I think they still do. Oh yeah, I got to turn my thing here. That's right. Social phobia is the other word for it, but social anxiety disorder is another. It's the same. It's the same thing. And I guess just let me give you the case first, and then we'll go into the details of it. This one's a 24-year-old man in graduate school who drops out because he's starting to have to present his work in front of his supervisors and mentors and such. So he's got to present every week in front of these folks. So he drops out of grad school because he's so anxious in having to do that. Whenever he gets in front of people in any social situation, a party, or if he's speaking in front of these folks, he gets petrified with this intense fear that he's going to embarrass himself in some way. Whether they're going to see his hand shaking when he's talking, or whether he's going to vomit or something in front of everybody, there's fear of something embarrassing happening to him in front of these folks. He worries so much about these social situations that he starts to have panic attacks. Okay, now we talked, last time we talked about panic disorder, and these are folks that have panic attacks just out of the blue for no apparent reason. We can't figure out why. This guy, it's not that. It's just in social situations. So whenever he thinks about having to go to a social event, or if he's in a social event, that's when he has his panic attacks. Because of this, he starts avoiding social situations, and again, he goes to the extreme of dropping out of grad school. How can that's pretty extreme for him to do that. So that's definitely interfering with his function, I'd say. He avoids parties, but if he must attend, he's either a wallflower, you guys know what that means, stands against the wall, doesn't interact with anybody, or he uses alcohol as his buffer, right? You use alcohol, what happens? You kind of become the life of the party, right? So here's a guy who's real shy, intimidated, socially anxious, a little alcohol, and he's the life of the party. Unfortunately, it's starting to cause its own problems. So not only does he have social anxiety disorder now he's starting to drink a little too heavily, and it's getting out of control. He's probably alcohol dependent, or at least has alcohol abuse. So we'll pick this case up in a second. We'll talk about what happens to him as far as treatment and such. So what is social phobia? It's another anxiety disorder or brain illness that is defined by having a fear of social situations where the person is afraid of being judged or laughed at or embarrassed, doing something that's embarrassing. The anxiety can be so bad that they have a panic attack in these situations. And you guys probably, if you didn't come last time, you probably know a little bit about what a panic attack is anyway. Usually the person realizes that the fear is sort of unreasonable, that this fear or anxiety of social situations is unreasonable, but it interferes with their jobs, relationships, and other day-to-day life. Now, there are some differences in kids to make the diagnosis. The kids can't just be afraid of adults or anxious around adults. They also have to be, in the classroom or around their peers. They're also anxious in those situations. And also, kids may not have a panic attack. What they may look like is they may cry or have a tantrum. They may freeze or shrink from social situations or unfamiliar people. And then if they're under 18, the social phobia has to be there for at least 6 months to make the diagnosis. Whereas in adults, it doesn't necessarily have to be, I guess. Which that's kind of odd, because usually to me, the cases that I've seen are folks that have had this ever since childhood, and it's way more than 6 months. I mean, this is a lifelong kind of thing. What are the common thoughts that people think about? People are worried about all kinds of things. What are they going to, they walk into Walmart and they're worried that everybody's going to look at them and they're going to think that they're crazy or think that they're weak or stupid or things like that. They may not speak in public, again, just like our case. They may be afraid that somebody's going to hear their voice shake or see their papers jitter or something like that. I hope you guys aren't watching my papers. Are they jittering? They might be just a little bit. I've done this so much that I can pretty much make a fool out of myself and not worry too much about it. But they also have blushing, commonly get blushed. Yeah, everybody knows what that is, and you've seen folks with blushing before. They also have some other symptoms. They get sensitive to criticism in general. Now, not everybody with social phobia, but a lot of times folks with social phobia will get real sensitive to criticism or negative evaluation or rejection. Then they have difficulty being assertive. So this is a person who, you'll look at them and they'll sort of look away and they'll put their head down and they won't want to talk to you. And this lack of assertiveness that comes out. They sometimes have a low self-esteem or a feeling of being inferior to everyone else, and this is kind of how you treat it, because you teach them, look, you're no more inferior than anybody else in this world, so you got to work with some of the thoughts that they have about themselves. Again, poor eye contact, clammy hands, tremors, shaky voice. They tend to have a hard time when they're kids in school because of not interacting too well in the classroom. They just want to, again, they want to sort of shy away and not interact much, and that can be tough for the teachers to engage them. Again, as kids, they're usually shy, and we call it shy. I know a lot of people call it shy in the lay population, but it's probably some type of early social phobia, and it's probably some genetic trait. It's something they're born with, and if the parents think back long enough, they can think that the child was really slow to warm up socially ever since I can remember. It's not too uncommon. It's about 5.3 million adult Americans, and again, it's equal in men and women. Commonly, it goes along with alcohol problems, and the reason that is, again, just like I said, alcohol is kind of socially acceptable, right? We can get alcohol anywhere we want. It's not, you don't have to go to the doctor. You don't have to see a therapist. You don't have to say, I got a brain illness, I'm crazy, whatever people think. You don't have to say any of that stuff, do any of that stuff. You go down, you get yourself a couple of beers, you drink them before you go out socially. The problem is, if your brain, we talked about addictions in here a long time ago, a couple of months ago, or 6 months ago or so, and if your brain happens to be wired in a certain way that you're susceptible to addiction, from like family history and whatever else, if that happens and you start drinking for social, because of the social anxiety, bam, next thing you know, you're drinking, not 2 beers now, it's 3 or 4 beers. Next thing you know, it's a 12-pack, and then it's alcohol dependence. You start having trouble with that. So you really, if you have folks like this, you got to keep an eye on those other problems as well as the anxiety. So what happens to our case here? This guy, he sees a commercial for a medication on TV for social anxiety disorder. This happens all the time. And he comes in and to a therapist, and she works with the patient on, again, gradually exposing him to social situations and working with his thoughts about what might happen. She refers him to treatment for alcohol, for his alcohol abuse, and to a psychiatrist for medication. And the psychiatrist uses, again, what do we use for anxiety disorders? Serotonin medicines. What kind of psychotherapy? I sort of alluded to this earlier. These folks have a lot of feeling like when they walk, let's just use a concrete example. You walk into Walmart and all of a sudden the person feels like the attention is on them, like everybody's noticing them and watching them, and then they become very self-conscious about how they're walking and what they're doing, and that's a miserable way to feel, right? So in the therapy, what you talk to them about is, look, how many people are in Walmart? And do you feel like that, do you really think realistically everybody stops and looks at you when you walk into Walmart? Probably not. Most people don't want to be bothered by anybody. They just want to get on their way, get their stuff, and get out of there because it's so crowded, right? So that's one thing. You work with them on that. The second thing is, let's say they're afraid that they might vomit or that they might trip and fall, right? So you work with them and you say, okay, let's say worst case scenario, you walk into Walmart and you fall, right? What's the worst thing? You think a bunch of people are going to stand around at you and laugh? I mean, maybe 1 or 2 now. Most people wouldn't do that. Most people would feel kind of bad for the person. They'd come over to see if you needed help and things like that. And so you work with them a little bit about challenging some of their thoughts that they have or what stuff might happen or what the probability of something like that happening is. So that kind of helps a little bit. And then you kind of expose, they have to get exposed a little bit to the social situation. Slowly but surely you expose them to the social situations. We talked to some examples with the OCD on that, but it's a similar kind of thing. You talk about it first, then you kind of ease at it. Maybe let's use Walmart again. I don't know why I keep saying Walmart. I'm giving them so much free press. They probably love this talk. They're going to start advertising in between or something. But let's say they're afraid to go into a crowded place like that. And one of the things you could do is talk about it first for a while in the therapist's office. Then you kind of drive out into the parking lot and have the person sit there in the parking lot and just think about going in. They don't have to go in. Just think about it, right? Next thing they do is they walk up to the front door. They don't go in. They just walk to the front door, walk back to the car until there's no anxiety. Next thing they do is they go into the store with a friend or with somebody that they trust, right? And then they start thinking some of these things about what the therapist said, like, okay, now I'm walking in, I'm looking around, well, nobody's looking at me too much, just the greeter. And then, they walk through and notice, hey, hardly anybody looked at me, I didn't trip, I didn't fall, nothing bad happened, so maybe I can try it by myself the next time. And so then that's how it works. That's how the therapy works.